The jukebox had just gone silent when it happened. A rowdy biker gang crowded the bar, their laughter sharp and cruel, their boots heavy against the wooden floor. In the corner sat a quiet woman in a wheelchair, her eyes steady, her hands folded over a worn leather bag. She didn't look like trouble. She didn't even look like she belonged there. But when one biker sneered, leaning down and yanking at her jacket, the room froze. What they uncovered wasn't weakness. It was a symbol that silenced every laugh in the bar. Who was she, and why did one tattoo make hardened bikers step back in fear? Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear. Let's begin. The bar smelled of old wood, cheap beer, and a kind of restlessness that never really left. Outside, snow had begun to fall, muffling the world in white silence. But inside, the atmosphere was anything but quiet. A dozen motorcycles were parked out front, their chrome bodies still dripping with melted ice. Their riders, men with leather jackets, thick beards, and a sense of ownership over every square inch of the place, sat sprawled across stools and booths, their voices too loud, their laughter too sharp. It was the kind of bar where the regulars knew not to interfere, where people kept their heads down and minded their own business. But tonight, someone sat among them who didn't fit the mold. In the far corner, by a low table near the frosted window, she sat in her wheelchair. A woman in her mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back neatly, her face pale from the cold, but with a strength that clung to her features. She wore a simple skirt, a warm top, and a short winter coat. Nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. Her hands rested quietly on her lap, one finger brushing against a scar that ran along her knuckles, half hidden, half remembered. At first, the bikers ignored her. They were too busy with their own bravado, slapping each other's backs, boasting about old fights, bragging about the trouble they'd caused on the road. But one of them, a tall man with a skull tattoo crawling up his neck, noticed her silence. He smirked. "Look at that," he muttered to the man beside him. "Little lady thought she could roll in here all quiet, like she belongs." Another laughed, leaning forward. "She's in a wheelchair, man. Easy pickings. Probably waiting for her caretaker." The group chuckled, their amusement filling the room. But she didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window, where the snow fell thicker now, pressing its hush against the glass. And that stillness, it bothered them, because bullies feed on fear. They look for the flinch, the lowered gaze, the shrinking away. But when she gave them none of that, it made them restless. One biker finally stood, his boots thudding against the floorboards. He sauntered over, the air thick with the smell of alcohol and smoke as he leaned down, his hand pressing against her table. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. The woman slowly turned her head, her calm gaze meeting his. No anger, no fear, just stillness. "I'm not lost," she said quietly. That calmness was like fuel to his pride. He expected trembling, excuses, anything but serenity. He snorted. "Not lost, huh? Then what's a fragile little thing like you doing in a place like this?" The room shifted, all eyes dragging toward the corner now. The jukebox clicked, loading another song, but the music hadn't started yet. The silence stretched. The woman's lips barely moved, just waiting. The biker smirked wider. He wanted a reaction, and if her words wouldn't give it, maybe something else would. His fingers gripped the edge of her coat, tugging at it as though to prove she didn't belong. "You sure you're not waiting for someone to save you?" he sneered. The jacket slipped from her shoulder. And then time stopped. Ink. Sharp, precise. Not the messy scribbles of rebellion, but the carved emblem of belonging, of brotherhood, of battle. A Marine Corps tattoo, etched into her skin like a badge of fire. The biker's smirk faltered. The laughter behind him dimmed, because even if most of them had never worn the uniform, they knew enough to recognize it. This wasn't just any tattoo. This was blood, sweat, and oath. For the first time that night, the room held its breath. But she didn't gloat. She didn't smirk back. She simply pulled her jacket up again, slow and deliberate, as if the reveal had been accidental, though every nerve in her body had known exactly what it would do. The biker stepped back, his jaw tight, his pride suddenly cornered. His friends watched, some exchanging uneasy glances. Respect and fear were strange bedfellows, and both now hovered in the air. Still, pride is louder than wisdom. He spat on the floor, trying to reclaim the power, slipping through his fingers. "Tattoo or not," he muttered, "you're still just a cripple in a chair." The words hit the air like a gunshot, but she didn't react. Not with anger, not with pain. Her eyes lowered briefly, almost like a prayer, and then lifted again, steady and unwavering, and that silence cut deeper than any insult. The bartender, polishing glasses behind the counter, shifted uneasily. He'd seen enough in life to know when a storm was about to break. He glanced toward the door, half expecting more trouble to walk in. The bikers, restless now, muttered among themselves. Some shook their heads, none too eager to mess with someone who bore the mark of service. Others, however, whispered words like faker and washed up. The woman sat still, waiting. Snow pressed harder against the window, the wind rattling the old wood of the bar. Somewhere in the distance, the rumble of another engine echoed faintly through the storm. And though no one in the bar knew it yet, what happened in the next half hour would change the way they saw her forever. The bar had gone quiet, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was razor-sharp, like the moment before a storm when the world holds its breath. The woman sat there, her coat slipping from her shoulders, her modest shirt torn where the biker had grabbed her earlier. But it wasn't her clothes that froze the entire room. It was the sight inked on her skin. A tattoo. Bold. Unmistakable. The emblem of the United States Marine Corps stretched across her upper arm, dark against pale skin. The bikers stared, their sneers faltering. Some smirked, trying to play it off, but their laughter no longer sounded sure. Others shifted in their seats, whispering to one another, uncertain. They hadn't expected this, because the woman they thought was fragile, the woman they thought would cower, carried a mark that meant something more powerful than any leather jacket or bar fight ever could. She didn't move quickly. She didn't have to. She reached for her coat with calm, deliberate grace, like every second was in her control. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. "You should know what this means before you put your hands on me again." The biker leader, broad shoulders, tattoos crawling up his neck, laughed, though the sound cracked under pressure. "So what? A tattoo? Anybody can ink that. Doesn't mean you earned it." The woman's eyes, clear and shaken, locked on his. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. Then she spoke words that shifted the air. "Tell that to the graves of my brothers." The bar went colder than the snow outside. Even the jukebox, still humming faintly, seemed ashamed of its own noise. Her hand brushed over the emblem, as if remembering. Her jaw tightened, not in fear, but in memory. Scars told stories, but so did silence, and the silence around her was louder than anything the bikers had to say. The leader scoffed, louder this time, trying to win back control. "Look, sweetheart, this ain't the battlefield. This is my bar tonight, and around here, nobody cares what wars you fought." The woman leaned forward slightly, not with aggression, but with an energy that filled the room. "Everywhere I go, I carry my battlefield. You just walked into it without realizing." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People at the bar, civilians, truckers, locals, began shifting uncomfortably. Some knew enough to recognize the weight behind her words. Others were just sensing what was about to unfold, and they didn't want to be in the crossfire. The biker slammed his drink down, liquid splashing over the edge. "You think that scares me? Marines, soldiers, whatever. You're just a woman in a bar, and I'll make sure you remember it." The woman finally stood, and the room seemed to stand with her. She wasn't tall, not compared to the bikers, but her presence filled the space in a way none of them could. Her coat slid down completely, and for the first time, the light caught her scars, faint lines across her arm, a jagged mark near her collarbone, the kind of marks you don't get from living a safe life. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You already made one mistake by laying a hand on me. Don't make the second. Because I don't fight to win, I fight to end it." The leader hesitated. Just for a second. It was barely visible, but it was there. A flicker of doubt. That flicker spread like wildfire through his men. One shifted in his chair. Another looked down at his beer, suddenly less interested. They had come here to dominate, to show off their power. But power was a fragile thing when faced with someone who didn't need to prove hers. The leader leaned closer, nose to nose, his breath heavy with whiskey. "You think your war stories matter here? This is real life. And real life." He stopped, because in that moment, the woman did something none of them expected. She smiled. Not mockery, not arrogance. A small, sad smile. "You think war isn't real life." Her words hit like a hammer. Some people lowered their eyes. The weight of it was too much to look at. The silence dragged until it became unbearable. Then one of the younger bikers, restless and unsure, muttered, "Boss, maybe we should just let her be." That single sentence cracked the room apart. The leader whipped his head toward the kid, fury in his eyes, but it was too late. The doubt had spread. And the woman? She didn't move. She didn't gloat. She just stood there, the Marine Corps emblem visible, her scars like unspoken sentences. She wasn't trying to win. She wasn't even trying to prove anything. She was simply existing in her truth, and that truth was stronger than any threat in the room. Still, the leader wasn't done. His pride, his ego, too big to back down now. He shoved the table aside with a crash, the sound making everyone flinch. "You want to act like a soldier? Then show me. Prove it." The woman tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "Soldiers don't prove themselves to men like you." The tension snapped taut. People near the door were already slipping out quietly, knowing this was about to escalate. The storm wasn't over, it was just gathering. And in that moment, as the biker squared his shoulders and the woman stood calm and unshaken, something unexplainable happened. The door creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in. Boots. Heavy. Deliberate. Several pairs. The entire bar turned toward the entrance, and the atmosphere shifted again. This time not with fear, but with anticipation. Because when those men walked in, everything about the night was about to change. And none of them, neither the bikers nor the woman, could have predicted what came next. The bar was no longer a bar. It had transformed into a battlefield of silence, where even the air seemed frozen in fear. Broken glass still crunched beneath boots as the bikers shifted uneasily, their leader's hands trembling after the slap of reality, the tattoo that branded itself into their minds like fire. The modest woman sat straighter now. Her shirt, torn by cruelty, no longer seemed like a mark of humiliation. Instead, the torn fabric revealed the truth etched on her skin. A Marine Corps insignia, bold and defiant. It wasn't just ink. It was a declaration, a reminder that she had worn the uniform, carried the weight, and stared death in the face long before any of these men had ever puffed their chests in false power. The biker who had ripped her shirt still hovered nearby, his face pale, his breath uneven. His bravado had drained out like spilled liquor. He had mocked her, stripped her dignity. Now he realized he had picked a fight not with a fragile woman, but with a warrior forged in the crucible of war. And yet, she didn't move to strike back. That was the part that made everyone uneasy. She didn't raise her fists, didn't hurl curses, didn't even look at them with hate. Instead, she stood with quiet composure, as though waiting. For what, nobody could tell. The bartender's hand shook as he wiped the same spot on the counter over and over, his eyes flicking nervously between the bikers and the door. The locals in the corner sat frozen, trapped between the urge to run and the fear of drawing attention. Even the jukebox had gone silent, the last notes of its tune fading into the tension. The leader of the bikers finally found his voice. You served." His words sounded hollow, like a schoolboy asking a teacher if she had really written the book he couldn't understand. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her jacket from the floor. Slowly, with dignity, she draped it over her torn shirt, covering herself. Then, she raised her eyes to meet his. "Yes," she said simply, "and I didn't fight for you to treat people like this." The words landed heavier than fists. They cut through the bravado, exposing the cowardice behind it. The leader's jaw clenched, but his eyes gave him away. Shame, buried under years of swagger. Behind him, one of the younger bikers shifted uncomfortably. His tattooed hands trembled as he muttered, "She's a Marine, man. We're messed up." The room seemed to tilt then. The power balance shifted. What had begun as a gang flaunting dominance now became a reckoning. But the woman's silence wasn't weakness. It was control. She didn't scream, didn't demand apology, didn't crumble. She knew real strength was not in how loud you roared, but in how steady you stood. And that was when the sound came. A low, steady rumble. Not from inside the bar, but outside. At first, it was faint, almost like thunder rolling across distant mountains. But it grew louder, heavier, unmistakable. The floorboards began to tremble. Glasses rattled on the shelves. Heads turned toward the windows. The biker's leader frowned. "What the hell is that?" The rumble deepened, until it was undeniable. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't trucks on the highway. It was rhythmic, mechanical. Rotors slicing through the night air. Choppers. The sound of helicopters approaching sent a ripple of panic through the room. A few locals gasped, others ducked instinctively. The bikers exchanged nervous looks. Their swagger cracked into fear. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, almost like a soldier recognizing the sound of home. Her lips moved in silence, whether a prayer or a memory, no one knew. Then the windows glowed. Blinding white light flooded through the cracks in the blinds, sweeping across the floor like daylight at midnight. The building vibrated as the helicopters drew closer, hovering directly above the bar. Dust fell from the ceiling, bottles rattled against each other, and the roar of blades drowned out every whisper of bravado left in the room. And then, boots hit the ground. The door swung open, and in poured men in uniform. Marines. Fully geared, eyes sharp, movements precise. They entered not with chaos, but with the calm discipline of those who had trained for moments exactly like this. The bar gasped as one. The lead Marine removed his helmet, his gaze scanning the room before settling on the woman. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Respect. He stepped forward and saluted, his posture rigid and proud. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath. The bikers stumbled back, their earlier arrogance shattered. Their leader's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The sight of real warriors, men who carried the same insignia that marked the woman's skin, reduced his false strength to dust. The woman didn't return the salute right away. Instead, she looked around the room, at the terrified locals, at the ashamed bikers, at the bartender frozen in place. And finally, she raised her hand, not in a salute of command, but an acknowledgement, a quiet gesture of unity. The lead Marine's voice carried over the roar of the helicopters. "Ma'am, we came because we heard." He didn't need to explain further. Everyone understood. Respect had called them. Brotherhood had brought them. And in that moment, the balance of power was no longer in question. The bikers stood exposed. Men who thought leather and noise made them strong, now trembling in the shadow of those who truly knew what it meant to fight. The leader dropped his gaze, shame painting his face red. Slowly, he muttered, We didn't know." The woman's response was steady, unwavering. "You should treat everyone as if they've fought battles you can't see." Silence swallowed the room. Her words weren't just for the bikers. They were for everyone. For the locals who had stayed silent. For the bartender who had looked away. For anyone who had ever judged without knowing. And outside, the choppers waited. Their rotors cut the night air. Reminder that justice could arrive not with fists, but with presence. The bikers began to step back, their bravado fully broken, their pride stripped raw. What had started as a night of cruelty had turned into their public undoing. But for the woman, it wasn't victory she sought. It was something greater. Dignity, respect, and maybe, just maybe, a reminder to the world that real strength doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand. The silence inside the bar was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of neon lights flickering over the doorway and the steady drip of melted ice from forgotten drinks. The bikers, who only hours earlier had swaggered in with mocking laughter and heavy boots, now sat frozen, heads bowed, eyes darting away from the woman they had tried to humiliate. The female veteran, still seated in her wheelchair, her shirt torn where the leather-clad brute had ripped it, adjusted her coat with quiet dignity. The Marine Corps tattoo that had been exposed still glowed like a brand, more powerful than any weapon, because it carried truth. Her truth. Outside, the rumble of engines faded as the Black Hawk unit and Marines, who had stormed in moments earlier, withdrew, leaving behind a silence so heavy that everyone could feel the weight of it. The bikers had been forced to line up, heads low, while the veterans' brothers in arms had saluted her, each one showing her the respect she had been denied for far too long. And now it was just her and them. She lifted her gaze slowly, her dark eyes, once filled with pain, now glowing with unshakable fire, meeting the leader of the bikers. He tried to hold her stare, but his bravado was gone. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but his hands trembled. "You thought you saw weakness," she said, her voice low but steady. "You thought a woman in a wheelchair was an easy target. You were wrong." The entire room felt those words. They weren't just for him. They were for every person who had ever dismissed her, ignored her scars, or pretended not to see her sacrifices. The leader swallowed hard, his voice cracking. I didn't know." Her laugh was short, bitter. "You didn't want to know. That's the problem." He looked down, shame rising like a flood in his chest. And for the first time, the woman leaned forward slightly in her chair, her face illuminated by the dim bar light. "You don't have to fear me," she said, her tone shifting. "But you will learn to respect what people like me have given so you can sit here and drink in peace. Respect is not a choice. It's a debt you owe." Those words cut deeper than any blade. The bikers shifted uneasily in their seats. Some looked away. One younger member, no older than 20, had tears welling in his eyes. He had joined the gang to feel powerful, to belong. But at that moment, he realized he was nothing compared to the quiet power of the woman before him. The bartender, who had watched everything unfold with wide eyes, finally broke the silence. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice trembling, "your drink is on the house. Always." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of relief, of finally being seen. Outside, the sound of the departing chopper still echoed, faintly through the night air. It wasn't just the sound of military power. It was the sound of acknowledgement, of a promise kept. She hadn't been abandoned. Not this time. The bikers began to stand, one by one. The leader stepped forward awkwardly, his voice unsteady. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll never forget this. You've given me something I'll carry the rest of my life." She tilted her head, studying him, then said simply, "Then carry it well." And with that, she turned her wheelchair toward the door. The bar was silent as she passed, every pair of eyes following her. No one jeered. No one laughed. Instead, one by one, men who had once been filled with arrogance began to rise to their feet in silence, not in defiance, but in respect. The heavy door swung open, letting in the cool night air. Snowflakes drifted down, catching the dim glow of the bar's neon sign. She paused on the threshold, letting the cold brush against her face. Her breath curled in the air like smoke. For years she had carried her scars alone, hiding her pain, forgotten by the country she had once given everything for. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had been seen. And in that quiet moment, with snow falling all around her, she whispered to herself, "I am not invisible anymore." Her words weren't meant for anyone else. They were for her. Behind her, inside the bar, the bikers sat in stunned silence. Some would leave that night and forget. Others would carry the weight of what they had witnessed for the rest of their lives. But none would ever mock her again. She rolled into the snow-covered street, the cold crunching beneath her wheels. Across the distance, far above, the Black Hawk circled once before disappearing into the night. It wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a gesture, a final salute. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning, because she had reminded everyone who saw her. Courage doesn't always come with medals, or uniforms, or speeches. Sometimes it sits quietly in a chair, scarred and unseen, until the world forces it to rise. And when it rises, it changes everything. So I ask you, if you were in that bar, and you saw her stand in her silence, her scars, her strength, what would you have done? Would you have looked away? Or would you have stood? The choice, my friends, is still yours.